The rank 2 pool contains a host of very strong monsters. However, historically, the pool has been held back because very few strategies were capable of committing enough level 2 bodies to the board to go to a rank 2 play anyway. Fortunately, with the introduction of Spright, Melffy, and other modern strategies, the rank 2 pool has seen a lot more use and has allowed for these incredibly strong monsters to shine. So today, we're going to look at some of the best rank 2 monsters in the game, what they do, and why they're seeing competitive play. And pouncing into number 10 is Cat Shark, which was once the best option available to the rank 2 pool if you needed a way to OTK your opponent. You see, Cat Shark has two effects. The first is that while it has a water monster as a material, it can't be destroyed by battle. But the reason why Cat Shark is so strong and saw competitive play is because of its second effect, which allows a detaching material to target any rank 4 or lower monster you control and double its original attack and defense until the end of the turn. The effect is really relevant because a big issue with most strategies focusing on level and rank 2 monsters is that most of the monsters have very low attack points. Even some of the strongest rank 2 monsters in the game, like Toadally Awesome and Paleozoic Opabinia, have pretty low stats at 2200 and 2400 attack respectively. So in the past, Paleo decks would struggle to either threaten lethal or OTK your opponent with such low attack monsters, which is why they often played Cat Shark in their extra deck. Because not only could you use Cat Shark's first effect to protect your life points while you have something like Swap Frog underneath it, you could use its second effect to make finding lethal a lot more simple. Because suddenly your low attack Toadally Awesome and Onibimaru become behemoths which could threaten to wipe over half your opponent's life points in a single attack. This made Cat Shark a staple extra deck monster for most Paleo strategies. But, like a lot of other rank 2 monsters, it was Spright which really made the card absurd. You see, Spright actually had a similar issue to Paleozoic. Because its monsters had such low attack power values, Spright could struggle to either OTK your opponent or beat over high attack monsters. Fortunately, Spright did have some options, such as Gigantic Spright, whose attack would double from 1600 to 3200 if you had an extra deck monster as one of its materials, making it a very strong tool to beat over your opponent's monsters on its own, especially since Gigantic lets you treat any Link 2 monsters as level 2 in order to summon it. But Gigantic Spright becomes even better when paired with Cat Shark. Because Gigantic doesn't double its attack, it doubles its original attack. So if you summon out Gigantic from the extra deck as a material, you can then use the effect of Cat Shark to target the Gigantic Spright and double its attack once more. This turns Gigantic from what would be an unimpressive 1600 attack monster to a strong 3200 monster to an absolutely absurd 6400 attack monster, which is going to be able to beat over some of the strongest monsters in the game, including a 6 material rival. Currently, Cat Shark is seeing a lot less play in Spright since the deck has gotten a few better tools that can OTK your opponent even more easily than Cat Shark, but even then, the card is still a great option for Spright in other rank 2 strategies. Hiding at number 9 is Joyous Melffy, Melffy's strongest boss monster and the one that's managed to see the most play in Melffy decks. Joyous can be made with 2 or more level 2 beast type monsters, and when you do, you get access to 2 very strong effects. Its first effect lets you detach materials from Joyous so that all your Melffy monsters you control can attack directly. And its second effect is a quick effect and lets you target a Beast Xyz monster you control and return it to the extra deck. Then special summon out beast monsters from your graveyard up to the number of materials that your returned Xyz monster had. Both of these effects have some really nice utility. Its first effect allows Melffys to have a really easy path to access Zeus, since you can use the effect to ensure that your Xyz monster battles without actually having to crash into an opponent's monster. Which is pretty good considering the low stats of most of the Melffy Xyz monsters. But it's actually Joyous' second effect which makes it incredibly powerful both in pure Melffy and even in Tri-Brigade variants. You see, because every Melffy monster is a level 2 or lower beast type, you can use Obedient Schooled in order to summon out 3 Melffy monsters directly from your deck. But Obedient Schooled comes with several huge downsides, because not only are you locked into beasts for the rest of the turn, the beasts you summon all have their effects negated and are destroyed during the end phase. This is a huge issue for Melffy decks since the whole deck revolves around using the effects of their Melffy monsters during their opponent's turn. Joyous Melffy solves this issue because now instead of having the beast monsters you summon get popped during the end phase, you instead use those monsters to overlay to Joyous, and then during your opponent's turn you can use the effect of Joyous to return itself and summon out each of the 3 monsters that were attached to it, allowing you to use their effects. And you don't even have to use Melffys to summon it, allowing for Melffy decks to get quite creative in how they use Joyous with Obedient School. Some Melffy decks will use Tri-Brigade Kit and detach it from Joyous with its first effect, so you can use Kit's graveyard effect and get access to the Tri-Brigade engine. But more often than not, Melffy will choose to attach Cal and Tosa, since it means that Joyous Melffy isn't just a way to get your Melffys on board, it's also an interruption during your opponent's turn as well. Melffy definitely isn't the strongest deck out there, but Joyous Melffys gives the deck a huge boost in power, and allows it access to more options with cards like Obedient Schooled and Zeus. Exploding into number 8 is Paleozoic Opabinia, one of the 2 archetypal Xyz monsters available to the Paleo that allows them to keep up with Zodiac during its tier 0 reign. And for good reason, because Opabinia only really needs 2 level 2 monsters to summon and comes with 3 incredible effects. Its first effect makes it a towers monster, like all the other paleo traps when they're treated as monsters. This makes Opabinia unaffected by all other monster effects and becomes fairly difficult for your opponent to deal with. Its second effect allows you to activate Paleozoic trap cards from your hand. So every Paleozoic trap from Onibimaru to Canadia can be used as if they were an infinite impermanence. And lastly, if Opabinia has a trap card as an Xyz material, you detach a material from Opabinia to add any Paleozoic trap card from your deck to your hand, with this effect being a hard once per turn. Opabinia and Anomalocaris both gave Paleozoics a really strong payoff for their trap monsters, and the deck would be considerably weaker without either. Opabinia just so happens to be the easier to access boss monster between the two, since you only need to use 2 monsters to summon it. And every one of Opabinia's effects comes with its own uniquely powerful utility. Its towers-like effect means that monster-based interaction is virtually useless against it, which makes it perfect for setting up Zeus lines by attacking a defense position monster, since your opponent can't use something like DPE or Kaleidoheart to remove it from the field. Its second effect, which allows you to use paleo trap cards from your hand, not only gives you native protection from huge back row wipes like Lightning Storm or Evenly Match, it also allows for Paleo's slow as molasses playstyle to speed up considerably, since you can use your traps as if they were quick play spells. And because every Paleo in your graveyard summons itself by chaining to the activation of a trap card, Opabinia lets Paleo swarm the field with tons of monsters. And its third effect allows you to gain some free advantage by searching for any Paleo in your entire deck. And all of the Paleo cards happen to have incredibly powerful generic effects. If you're facing another back row player, you can use Olenoids in order to pop their trap cards, or if you're facing a combo deck, Canadia is useful for interruption, or if you'd rather just continue to swarm the field with Paleos, you can search a Morella to have a free trap card to activate. Opabinia is an excellent contributor to the Paleo strategy, and there's no doubt the deck would have seen considerably less play without it in its arsenal. Every one of its effects just has tons of utility, both back when it was released and even in the modern format. Reinforcing number 7 is Sky Cavalry Centuria, a light beast warrior type Xyz that boasts some really interesting removal. Because at the end of the damage step, if Sky Cavalry battles, you can detach a material to return that monster at battle to the hand. And this effect is made even better by Centuria's first effect, which stops him from being destroyable by battle so long as it has Xyz material attached. These effects in tandem actually represent a really strong form of removal because it doesn't target or destroy, allowing Sky Cavalry to be used out monsters with some of the strongest kinds of protection in the game, which is precisely what decks like Paleo used it for. Most of the Paleo trap cards actually need to target a card your opponent controls, which made cards like Onibimaru and Canadia pretty ineffective in the face of something like Red Eye's Dark Dragoon. And what's even better is that because Sky Cavalry can't be destroyed by battle if it has a material, its smaller stats aren't a really big issue. It allows it to stick around on the field even when battling a monster that would dwarf its attack. And it was this detail that allowed Sky Cavalry Centuria to see a surge of play in the modern metagame since it had incredible synergy with Zeus. Because with Sky Cavalry, you could crash into any monster your opponent controls, no matter how large they are, to guarantee that an Xyz monster battled this turn. And because you don't have to use Sky Cavalry's effect, you can just keep an extra material for your Zeus. Then in main phase 2, you can overlay Downward Magician on top of your Sky Cavalry, and then go into Zeus, which gives you enough materials to wipe the entire field twice. Sky Cavalry is a great card, and even if it wasn't for Zeus, it'd probably still be a staple in rank 2 strategies for how strong its removal is. But it also just so happens to be one of the strongest rank 2s available that can guarantee that an Xyz monster battles. And it would be the strongest, if not for the next card on this list. Sneaking into number 6 is number 2, Ninja Shadow Mosquito, a card which has managed to replace both Sky Cavalry as a great Zeus enabler and Cat Shark as an incredible OTK tool, even though it only has 0 attack. Because all of Mosquito's effects happen to be absurdly strong. It has the same battle protection as Sky Cavalry without needing material, and you don't take any battle damage from attacks involving Mosquito, which makes it an even better Zeus line than Sky Cavalry. But that's not all, because Mosquito also has 2 other effects. The first makes it so that all monsters your opponent controls must attack, if able. And the second, which triggers when an attack is declared and allows you to choose between one of 2 effects. The first effect needs to detach a material from Mosquito to place a hallucination counter on a monster your opponent controls, and hallucination counters will negate the effects of a monster they're on. Or if your opponent already controls a monster with a hallucination counter, you can instead choose to inflict damage to your opponent equal to the attack of any monster with a hallucination counter on it. None of Mosquito's effects have any kind of once per turn on them, which is why it's such a strong OTK tool, since as long as you can swarm the field with enough monsters to declare multiple attacks, you can easily burn your opponent for all their life points. This is precisely why Shadow Mosquito works so well in Spright, because the deck is more than capable of putting a ton of monsters on the field with both the Spright and Nimble engine, giving you more than enough material to make Mosquito and have multiple monsters to declare attacks with. So if your opponent controls a Bestial Magma Hut, you can make Mosquito and declare an attack with it so you can put a hallucination counter on it. And from there, you can keep crashing your other monsters into Magma Hut, because even if your monster would be destroyed by battle, your opponent is always guaranteed to take 2500 damage from the affected Mosquito from each attack after the first. making it laughably easy to OTK. And even if you don't happen to OTK, in main phase 2 you can just go into Zeus to wipe your opponent's field since your Mosquito can't be destroyed by battle. Ninja Mosquito was released very recently, but even despite that, the card has shown how incredibly strong it could be in the right deck, and it just so happened that Spright could get a ton of use out of it, just like the next card on this list. Cutting into number 5 is number 65, Djinn Buster, the boss monster of the Melffy series of cards in Zexal. But unlike the Melffy cards, Djinn Buster has a really strong effect, because whenever your opponent activates a monster effect, you can detach 2 materials from itself to negate that effect, and then burn your opponent for 500 damage. Despite how strong this effect is as a free monster negate, Djinn Buster never really saw too much play historically, because it was just too difficult to go into for most decks, since a lot of strategies that could go into rank 2s weren't usually focused on dark monsters. As a result, Djinn Buster fell to the wayside for a while because so few decks could properly access it. That was, at least, until the release of Spright. Because Spright is a deck that can easily access a ton of rank 2s over the course of a turn, and its best monsters, Blue and Jet, just so happen to be dark monsters. This gives Djinn Buster a deck that it could call home, and gave Spright a way to take advantage of its extra bodies by turning them into a monster negate. And Djinn Buster became even stronger when paired with the generic level 2s that Spright can access real easily thanks to Gigantic. Capshell is the best example of this, because Capshell allows you to draw a card whenever it's distributed, uses material for a fusion, synchro, or link summon, or detach from an Xyz monster in order to activate its effect. So what you can do with Spright is summon Capshell from your deck with the effect of Gigantic, then link off that Capshell into an elf so that you can draw a card for free. Then, with the effect of Elf, you can summon back the Capshell and use it overlay into a Djinn Buster. Then, during your opponent's turn, whenever you negate your opponent's monster effect with Djinn, you would detach Capshell and get another free draw out of it. This basically means that by the time your turn rolls around, Capshell just acted as a pot of greed, and if you summon it out again, you get to draw yet another card, making Capshell and Djinn a great combo for card advantage. Djinn is a pretty strong card that for a while never really had a home. But because of Spright, the card has seen a huge surge in popularity and has become a staple choice in Spright extra decks to add to their end board and play around common hand traps like Ash Blossom and Nibiru. Though, even for as strong as it is, Spright is the only deck that can really play it, at least for now. And sweeping to number 4 is Onibimaru Soul Sweeper, another recent addition to the Rank Duel toolbox that already proven itself as a vital piece for level 2 strategies, especially in the current format, because Onibimaru's effect just so happens to counter a ton of graveyard effects. Its first effect lets you target a monster your opponent controls and banish it until your opponent's end phase. This works in tandem with its second effect, which, when Onibimaru is destroyed by an opponent's card, lets you shuffle back banished monsters into the deck up to the number of materials Onibimaru had when it was destroyed, with both of these effects being a hard once per turn. This type of removal is excellent, even if it's only temporary. You see, in the current format, there are tons of different cards that really want to hit the graveyard in some way or another. If your opponent controls a Dark Charmer that you beat over by battle, then they get a free search from their deck, letting them search for cards like Tearlament's Havness or Spright Blue for free. Or your opponent may control a Bestial Druid Swarm, which, when sent to the graveyard in any way, even by being linked off, can trigger to send any monster you control to the graveyard, outing strong boss monsters like Toadally Awesome. Onibimaru exists and gives decks like Spright an option to remove these problematic monsters to the field during your turn without triggering their graveyard effects, making it really valuable as a tool when dealing with certain graveyard effects, especially because your opponent only gets those monsters back during the end phase and not yours, which means that during their turn, they can't even link off their monsters or try to crash it. But if you're really worried about your opponent getting access to the monsters banished again, because it's a strong interaction or something that's difficult to out, you can use Onibimaru's second effect to take care of the monster you banished permanently. If you just crash Onibimaru into an opponent's monster, that counts as being destroyed by an opponent's card. Then, with its second effect, you can choose to shuffle back the monsters you banished with Onibimaru's first effect. Then, during your opponent's end phase, because your opponent's monster is returned to the deck and it isn't banished, they don't get a chance to bring it back. Like with Mosquito, Onibimaru hasn't been around for very long, but even in the short amount of time it's been released, it's already proven itself as an excellent tool for rank 2 strategies that will no doubt be used for years to come. Clawing its way into number 3 is number 29, Mannequin Cat, one of the strongest rank 2 monsters in the game that's capable of winning duels all on its own, because its effect can be used to summon out virtually any monster in the game directly from your deck. Mannequin Cat's main effect triggers whenever a monster is special summoned to your opponent's field, and lets you target any monster your opponent controls to special summon a monster from your hand, deck, or graveyard with either the same type or attribute as that monster. So if your opponent summons out a Tearlament's Kit Callus, you can summon out a Spright Blue because Kit Callus is dark, or a Swap Frog because Kit Callus is also aqua. But if your opponent is playing a deck that rarely special summons, you can use Mannequin Cat's first effect to force a monster to be special summoned to your opponent's field, letting you use Mannequin Cat's special summon from the deck, even against a deck like Flew Under Reefs. Mannequin Cat's effect isn't a tool used for consistency like you might think. You can definitely get access to your engine if your opponent summons the right monster. But Mannequin Cat is more often than not used to bring out some kind of floodgate to counter the most common strategies in the meta. In the current meta, the best mannequin targets range from End of Anubis, a dark monster that you can summon against tier limits that basically acts as an Abyss Dweller, Thunder King Ryo, a thunder monster you can summon in the Spright mirror match to stop them from searching, and Chaos Hunter, a card you can summon against Flunderees after bringing back Dimension Shifter to stop them from banishing. But in the future meta, these targets can and will change. Newman would be great against Gishki to stop them from ritual summoning, or if Dinomorphia is doing well, you can use Mannequin Cat to summon out Jinzo from your deck and turn traps offline. Mannequin Cat's effect is absolutely absurd. The amount of utility it has is almost unmatched, and as long as a rank 2 strategy is playable at all, it's going to see play in people's decks. But there are still a couple of other cards which have even more utility than Mannequin Cat. And fittingly at number 2 is Gigantic Spright, the main extra deck boss monster of Spright, the strategy that revolutionized rank 2s and boosted the strength and accessibility of every level 2 monster in the game. And Gigantic Spright is to blame. Because of Gigantic, you can summon out any level 2 monster from your deck by detaching a material for effect. But both players would be locked out of summoning any of the monsters the rest of the turn, except for rank, link, and level 2 monsters. This might sound like a detriment at first, but because it locks both players, this effect can be used to stop your opponent from using strong hand traps like Bystials or Nibiru against you. With such a great effect, you might think that Gigantic would be difficult to access, but that's not true at all. Because to summon it, you can use any 2 level 2 monsters, and what's even better, you can also treat link 2 monsters you control as level 2 for a Gigantic summon. You even get a bonus if you do this because as long as Gigantic has an extra deck monster as a material, its attack is doubled from 1600 to 3200. But of course, the strongest aspect of Gigantic is being able to summon out a level 2 monster from your deck. This gives Spright access to a whole host of different options for monsters they otherwise wouldn't have access to, and has allowed for Spright to have a ton of different variants. Runic Spright, for example, usually summons out cards like Eperia and Capshell so they can draw extra cards on their turn and their opponent's turn so they can gain a ton of card advantage and draw into even more of their engine. Trapigate Spright can use Gigantic to summon out Kiraz or Kit from the deck in order to start your Trapigate plays. Or more commonly, you'll see Gigantic summon out Swap Frog from the deck because Swap Frog lets Spright access the most powerful rank 2 in the game, which just so happens to take number 1 spot on this list. And hopping into the number 1 is Toadally Awesome, one of the most powerful Omni-Negates in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. You see, Toadally Awesome has 3 effects, and every one of them is incredibly strong in their own way. Its first effect makes it so that every standby phase you can detach a material to special summon a frog monster from your deck to get a free body. And its third effect makes it so whenever it's sent to the graveyard, you get a free follow-up, as it lets you add any water monster from your graveyard to your hand. But it's Toadally Awesome's negate that makes it truly powerful, as on a soft once per turn, whenever your opponent activates a spell or trap card or monster effect, you can send an aqua monster you control to the graveyard to negate the activation and destroy the card. And that's pretty great, but that doesn't stop there. Because if Toadally Awesome destroys the card, you also get the option of setting the card to your field, putting a stop to any graveyard effects your opponent would activate since the card you destroyed would be on your side of the field and not in the graveyard. The only issue with Toadally Awesome is that it isn't generic since it specifically needs 2 Aqua-type monsters in order to summon. But for most strong rank 2 focused strategies, this really isn't a problem, especially in decks like Paleo Frog, which use Toadally Awesome as their main boss monster, since it was easy to access both with the Frog portion of the deck and the Paleo Trap monsters since they also happen to be Aqua-type. But for other decks like Spright, they need to play a Swap Frog package in order to access Toadally Awesome since the deck is full of Thunder-type monsters and can't access it with their main engine. But it's almost always worth it to play the Swap Frog package in Spright just because of how strong Toadally Awesome is. Because a single Toad represents a ton of advantage in follow-up for Spright. Its standby phase effect is used to summon out a level 2 body that you can banish with Smashers for free, or even a Dupe Frog if you want to protect your monsters from being over. Its graveyard effect lets you add back Swap Frog or Nimble Beaver, so you can always have an extra level 2 body in hand for follow-up. And of course, Toadally Awesome's negate is absurdly strong. But the thing that makes it even stronger is Spright Elf. Because Toadally Awesome's negate is a soft once per turn, so if you use Toadally Awesome to negate an opponent's card by sending itself, you can then use the effect of Elf to bring back Toadally Awesome so you can negate another card and trigger its graveyard effect again for even more follow-up. And with cards like Gigantic Spright making Swap Frog and Toad incredibly easy to access, Toad has become the best boss monster that you can summon in Spright and was even banned in the OCG for how well it synergized with Spright. Toad has historically been the best rank 2 monster in the game, so much so that even non-rank 2 strategies like Plunder and Sharks would go into Bahamut Shark in order to access Toadally Awesome's negate. And even right now, it's Sprite's best weapon against tier limits, capable of stopping their strongest playmakers without triggering their graveyard effects, and giving Spright enough options to even stand up to a tier 0 meta, which is why even in the modern era, it's the best rank 2 monster in the game. Alright, and that's the list. If you know of any other rank 2s we may have missed, or have any ideas for future videos just like this one, please let us know down in the comments below.